Welcome to the Enkel Expert Access Series. Our topic today is nonprofit board governance and strategic planning with an emphasis on risk and judiciary financial responsibilities. We're speaking to Doug Nelson, founder, president, and managing director of the Discovery Group, an international consulting firm dedicated to the social profit sector and focused on helping organizations achieve their vision and elevate community impact. The Discovery Group works side by side with clients to help them envision change, determine how to make it happen, and put the necessary tools and skills in place for success. Throughout his career, Doug has served in a number of important roles, including Chief Development Officer at the University of Alberta, President and CEO of the BC Cancer Foundation, and President of the California Pacific Medical Foundation before founding the Discovery Group. Collectively, he has raised over $1 billion for organizations in Canada and the US. Doug, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me, Robin.
It's my pleasure. Okay, so to kick things off, why don't you tell me about the Discovery Group and perhaps clarify for listeners what is meant by social profit?
Thanks a lot, Robin. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. So, conventionally, you'll hear people talk about the nonprofit or the not-for-profit sector, which is kind of a negative definition. It's kind of like saying I'm Canadian, and I know I'm Canadian because I'm not American. And really, we want organizations to talk about what they deliver in the world, which is profit, which is something, an advantage or an advance in the social sector. And so we want a lot of our work with our clients across the social profit sector is helping them to anchor in abundance rather than scarcity. And social profit is really that anchoring in the abundance. This is the good work we're going to do collectively with our donors, with our board, with our clients, with our team. And that's the social profit that collectively we generate on behalf of everyone in society.
Very good. And how long have you guys been around? How long has Discovery Group been around?
The Discovery Group started in 2017, and I had been working in the United States in San Francisco as head of a hospital foundation and wanted to come home. And having reported to a number of boards as a chief executive officer, I was animated by this question that there must be a better way. There must be a better way for boards and management teams to work together to advance the cause rather than what I had experienced in some instances where it was sort of an unhealthy tension or two sides trying to keep each other at arm's length. There's got to be a better way to get the passion and the commitment of board members around the table in service to the mandate of the organization and amplifying the good work of the management team. So that's what we've been doing since 2017, and it's been quite an adventure so far.
Very good. And about how many clients have you guys had over the years?
So over the years, we're coming up on having worked with almost 200 organizations since 2017, and in the last year we worked with just over 60 individual organizations. A number of organizations we've worked with for a long time or on a recurring basis, but so we really enjoyed those long-standing relationships with clients, and we love the opportunity to get to know new clients and help them in support of their mission.
Fantastic. And so what are your specific areas of expertise?
We think of our work in three lines of business, which is that strategic planning and governance, or strategy and governance, helping organizations with strategic planning, addressing strategic issues in their organizations, or really important issues in their organizations. Sometimes it can be up to a restructuring or a board renewal or those types of things. It's a second line of business is in philanthropic consulting, so helping organizations to raise the money that they need to fulfill their missions, whether it's a comprehensive or a capital campaign, or reviewing and supporting their ongoing fundraising programs. A number of our colleagues work in helping raise the money that makes the engine of these organizations run. And then the third, we have a team that works in search that helps place leaders in social profit organizations in those key leadership roles, whether it's around the board table, in the C-suite, or as head of fundraising.
Very good. Okay, so today I want to hone in on topics relating to board governance and strategic planning during the session. So specifically around risk and judiciary financial responsibilities. But before we jump into that, I noticed on your website that you said one of the first questions we ask leaders is, does your strategy match the ambition of your purpose? Why is this important?
We want to make sure that we're organizing ourselves to move closer towards solving the problem or addressing the problem the organizations exist to serve. And one of the challenges that can happen in our sector is the reality, the practicality of the day-to-day, that particularly if organizations are anchored in scarcity, they can focus too much on the road right immediately in front of them. Take smaller steps, smaller strides. Organizations that are focused on just the next tiny step, anchored in scarcity, tend to find really good reasons not to do things, or reasons why barriers are insurmountable, or we can't find our way over or through, or and so we want to make sure that the strategy is looking well down the road. The strategy is about helping these organizations and helping the donors that fund them, the funders that fund them, the clients that are served by them, connect with that ultimate purpose. So if our strategy doesn't match the ambition of our purpose, we're unlikely to accomplish very much. If we anchor to something further down the road, it's amazing how far organizations can go.
Makes sense. So you also talk a lot about alignment. So why is alignment between a board and the senior leadership so important?
Well, and alignment isn't a permanent thing. It's sort of it's a concept you achieve, and you know it when you feel it. Wow, all the wind is at our back, and we're going to be able to move quickly together as board and management. But that same management team and that same board, some months later, may find themselves a bit out of alignment, and they're blowing at the back anymore, and that is very real. So we want to identify what are the elements of alignment that are really important. Shared purpose, shared strategy, shared measurements of success, and shared timeline. And if you have those four things in common, you have reference points. So even if interpersonal conflict or a change in things happens, if you've got those four anchors to come back to that ensure alignment for the organization. No organization stays in alignment forever, and it's a constant rigor to ensure that you're either in alignment or close to it. And we work with a lot of organizations to help them identify the triggers that say, okay, this is a conversation that isn't working because we're not in alignment around something, and giving them the tools to identify what the causes of those misalignments might be and address that issue rather than addressing the symptoms of that misalignment, which can really stall out an organization or a strategy implementation.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so let's talk about risk. How should boards think about risk?
I think this is an area where in the sector we've seen a growing amount of sophistication. When I was first CEO a number of years ago, risk registers were very new to the sector. And it really required you having someone who was a CPA or managing, at one of the big audit firms to really have an understanding of how risk might affect. Today, most organizations, and certainly all large organizations, have an emerging sophistication in their understanding around risk. We encourage boards to think of risk as part of the suite of tools and the suite of the things that they need to understand in order to give good advice and make good decisions on behalf of their organizations. Risk is not something to be avoided, it is something to be understood. And one of the things that we see when we're doing strategic planning or any board governance work is, just like in any group of people, you're going to have a wide variety of risk tolerances. And so there's not necessarily one that's right or wrong, but it can be really, really helpful for an organization to understand the diversity of risk tolerance around the table. And that's if CEOs are wondering why they're having a hard time saying yes to certain things or continuing to fund certain initiatives, it could be that risk tolerance is misunderstood around the board table. And that's a really, really good place to start.
Okay. And how can a board define and prioritize the various types of risks, financial, operational, reputational, that an organization might face?
So I think the financial ones really come out of the fiduciary responsibility, the commitments to CRA for charitable tax receipt, for your ability to issue tax receipts, and standard GAAP good governance. And those are relatively straightforward. There's nuance between different organizations and different sectors, but they are relatively forward.
Okay.
We really encourage organizations not to use cost per dollar raised as a measure of success. And one of the real risks that we see in financial risk management is just because something could be counted doesn't mean it is significant. And make sure that the risks that the board is paying attention to really are the significant, because they exist in every organization. And the ones that are insignificant also exist in every organization. And so making sure that we're paying attention to what matters. On operational risk, we really encourage boards to ask their management teams to define what operational risks exists. This comes from a professional knowledge of the day-to-day workings of the organization, and the specialized skills required to to do the work of the organization. And so working very closely with the management team to understand what those operational risks are. And then the board can monitor and ask really good questions about how the management team is avoiding, mitigating, managing the risks associated with operations. Mm-hmm. When boards try to come up with a list of operational risks, they tend to get very, very fine and very, very granular. And it can really slow down the organization. It can take a lot of management time to report on those operational risks. So we want to make sure risk for a lot of organizations, particularly those new to risk management and having risk awareness around the board table, they can get too granular. So we want to help find that level that's high enough to be at that strategic level. Mm-hmm. And the final one you mentioned is the riskiest of all the risks. Because Robin, everything is a reputational risk. From turning on the lights on Monday morning to locking the door on Friday afternoon, everything in between is a reputational risk. And so reputational risk is often what happens, and often it's a discussion that comes around the board table when the board begins to or has lost trust in the executive management. So we know when we come into an organization and they're saying, we've got a lot of reputational risk, there may be something specific going on, some malfeasance that's happened, or some over time they've realized they've been doing something suboptimally and now the consequences of that are coming to roost. It doesn't mean someone did something bad. It could mean that. But we've got a reputational risk. That often tells us that we're going to see a big difference between the perspective of management and the board. So if the viewers and listeners are hearing reputational risk around their board table, it's really important to dig into what do we mean by that. Mm-hmm. And there is, in really effective risk registers, there's usually one or two items in the reputational risk, not 300. And I have seen the reputational risks get well past 100 in one organization. And really, you're just trying to pay attention to far too many things to be effective at any of them.
Right. Okay. So what mechanisms or processes should a board use to monitor and mitigate risks on an ongoing basis?
I think working really closely with their management team, having that risk register, paying attention not necessarily to every line item on your risk register, every meeting or every finance and audit committee or governance, wherever the risk register sits, or some parts of it sit in different committees. Paying attention to when something has changed. If you're using red, yellow, green, if something has gone from green to yellow, let's have a deep conversation. Let's have a conversation about what's happening there and how our mitigation strategy or management strategy is being implemented to address that risk. Pay attention to what changes. Don't pay attention to the whole list at the same time, but do have that list. And that's a big, heavy lift to get started, but it really is a key tool for all organizations of any size.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, so let's pivot to the financial side of things. In your experience, do most boards understand their judiciary financial responsibilities?
No. And a very, very quick anecdote. When I started the work of the Discovery Group in 2017, I had this theory that the word fiduciary responsibility actually had no meaning at all relative to how boards do their work, that everybody had their own definition, which meant there wasn't a definition. And I tried this on the first two boards that I got to work with. I asked everybody before the break, the first coffee break in the morning for a day-long retreat, just write down your definition of fiduciary responsibility, and then pass it to me. And then over to the coffee break, one of my colleagues entered all the definitions into a slideshow. We interspersed CPA's definition and how CRA defines it. And then we showed, and this board, the first board, all over the map, all over the map. And I was feeling this deep satisfaction, like, aha, I knew it. But I also learned a really important lesson that as a facilitator, pointing out that the people you're working with early on in the day, that they don't know what they're talking about, is not a way to build good rapport. And so it was definitely a facilitator error. But it underlines that many organizations don't take the time to explain to themselves what fiduciary responsibility means in their organization. So we work with a lot of organizations to get it on 1 page or 2 pages. This is how we fulfill our fiduciary responsibility at this organization. It'll be in their bylaws, it'll be in their board terms of reference, their committee terms of reference, the accountabilities of the senior management team. And you can put it all on 1 page and say, this is how we do it. And so when they have a question about fiduciary responsibility, they can see where it might fit. And if it doesn't fit, then they need to have a conversation about changing their processes or changing their governance. But that very rarely needs to happen. It's just having a shared sense of what fiduciary responsibility means, which isn't unique to every organization, but it is going to have a unique flavor of what those basic rules are.
Right. Okay. And how can boards better educate themselves on fiduciary responsibilities?
So there's a lot of there's a lot of training. ICD does a lot of work in not-for-profit governance training. CPA organizations in different provinces across the country certainly offer a lot of that as well. We're past the time where we can have 1 or 2 accountants on the board, and we've checked the box that we have fiduciary responsibility, because we've got a smart gal and a smart guy who know what they're doing, and it really is a shared responsibility of the whole board. So that taking the time to understand what it is at the organization, if you're serving on a board now, making sure, how do we define our fiduciary responsibility? And we don't know, or we know it when we see it, or we just look after the money and make sure the rules are followed. That's not a good enough answer. So look for those opportunities for board training, both individually or for your board, and ask your finance and audit chair, ask your CEO, how we track fiduciary responsibility in our organization.
Okay. And so what is the distinction between financial operations and financial governance?
Well, this, as a consultant, I get to say it depends a lot. And it really does depend. It depends on the sophistication of organization. It depends on the professionalization and the skills and the qualifications of the professional staff in the organization. So it will vary. And even if the staff doesn't change, depending on how the organization is growing, how its funding mix is changing, the level of sophistication will change. And the line between what is governance and what is operational moves slowly, but it's not fixed. So it's always going to be an ongoing conversation. Mm-hmm. What I think is really important is if the finance committee is looking at the balancing of the checkbooks, they are way too far into operations and for organizations with professional staff. And if management is saying, you just approve the budget once and we spend all the money, that's way too much authority for management. Really relevant, really good conversations for organizations to have is, what are the amounts that management can make a decision within the budget or unbudgeted expenses? It's a really great conversation to have with your auditors around what is the level of significance in this organization given our budget, given the comparators of other organizations of a like size. Have that conversation. Mm-hmm. But rule of thumb, the board sets expectations and approves the budget and approves the rules in which the organization operates. The board should be asking whether management is within those rules and within those budgets. And if management can answer those questions, the board should go no further. Okay. It's when management can't answer those questions that boards come into operations. Okay. But boards are always welcome to come in. They're always able to come in. They're not always welcome. They're always able to come into operations. However, they should be really clear when they're doing so and why they're doing so.
So what training or resources can a board utilize to become more comfortable and knowledgeable about financial responsibilities?
Well, I think there's a lot of experts in the sector. I mean, Enkel is a great example. That ICD training that I mentioned before, I think, is a really good example. Having an understanding of what the expectations are for your with your auditors. So the auditors there's probably usually in boards there's two or three board members that pay a lot of attention to the audit and what the auditors say. And as long as it's a clean audit, nobody else pays much attention at all. It's a real great resource to ask good questions of the auditors about the organization, and you can learn a lot about how those with a professional expert eye view the work of the organization. Boards are always looking for chances, looking for opportunities for professional development. Bring those experts to the table, share that experience from across the sector. Make sure we all understand what GAAP accounting looks like, what fund accounting looks like. Even if you don't care as a board member, you still need to know the difference.
It's interesting. That is one of the most common questions we get when we do webinars with different nonprofit organizations. So I know that's important.
Yeah.
So in what ways can a board assess its performance regarding financial stewardship and accountability?
So first of all, we really encourage organizations to have financial measurements in their strategic plan, their public-facing strategic plan. Tell people how much money you're intending to raise. Tell people the number of people you're intending to serve. The measures that are relevant to the organizational purpose. Set those standards. Management and the board are management is going to propose, and the board is going to be approving an annual operating budget. One of the risks is, well, we missed the budget this year, but let's look forward. And really take the time, if you're on the board side, take the time to understand it doesn't mean that management failed or that necessarily did anything wrong if they missed budget, if they were under. Just like it doesn't mean that they're absolute superstars who deserve 50% raises if they exceed their budget in terms of revenue or underspend their budgets. In fact, in our sector, underspending budgets is a sign of an organization that is kind of consuming itself and really underperforming. So when we set these budgets, are we hitting the financial targets? As simple as that sounds, Robin, and you're nodding, and everybody listening will be like, yeah, of course. The amount of time that boards spend on, did we hit the goal? How accurate were our predictions? Do we have any ability to affect income and expenditure in a way to land closer to our target? That is time very well spent around a finance and audit committee table, great in conversation with the CFO and the CEO, and really critical that the board understands that dynamic. That, to me, that is the number one thing I'd want to have boards looking at, is the ability, how accurate are we able to predict? Even if we're able to predict only a quarter in advance, at the end of Q3, can we be within 10%?
Yeah, right.
If you can't be, there's something worth investigating there.
Right. And so you touched on this a little bit, but how should a board communicate and collaborate with management to ensure that financial goals and governance standards are aligned and met?
First and foremost, it should be a conversation in the strategic plan. It's going to be, and that's going to be represented in the annual operating plans. And most organizations in our sector of any size are having the boards approve the quarterly financials. The discussion around what's happening in those quarterly financials is a really important piece. The details of it can happen in the Finance and Audit Committee, but the bigger picture certainly needs to be part of the discussion for the whole board. And making sure that is a dynamic part. It's not just, oh, the numbers are coming up, I'm going to check my email. It really needs to be an engaging part. And one of the ways you make it engaging, don't just put up PowerPoint and put up charts of numbers. Actually talk about the strategic implications of exceeding our revenue targets, of managing our expenditures appropriately. Talk about what it means relative to the work of the organization. Make sure it's a narrative that all the board members can understand, and the importance is underlined for everyone around the table.
Right. Tell the story. All right. So
Again.
Enkel has a lot of nonprofit clients. What are the top three pieces of advice that you would give to them with regard to the board's role in risk and financial responsibilities?
Work really closely with the management team on defining the really the essential risks when it comes to financial risk and operational risks. Um, don't spend too much time on on the reputational risks. Really make sure you've got that nailed down. Second, make sure that the board members all have a shared understanding of how fiduciary responsibility is understood and executed around the board table and within the organization. And finally, make sure that the board has a really clear sense of how the financial conversations directly relate to the work of the organization. It's not finances over here, programming over here. It is a single whole. And the organizations that can hold that conversation as a single conversation have better conversations, more strategic, more generative. They spend more time in that explorer phase about what might be possible for the organization. They have better retention, and board members have a lot more fun.
Very good. Okay. Well, Doug, thank you so much for your time today. I know that organizations will find this information about board governance, specifically as it relates to risk and fiduciary responsibilities, very, very helpful. So thanks again for your time, and all the best to you and the team at the Discovery Group.
Thank you very much for having me, Robin.
Very good.